All right, great. So I think that it's time for us to get started. Thanks to everyone for showing up here for our business school panel. I'm Evan Olin. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm one of the sponsorship directors for O4U Business 2020. I'm joined by a really, really awesome panel here who are going to give you their perspective on business school, application process, all that great stuff. So with that, I'm going to start sharing this screen. And just want to note that our business school panel is sponsored by Cornell's SC Johnson College of Business. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Steffi Smith, who will be our panel moderator.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Evan. And as Evan mentioned, I am Steffi Smith. I'm an MBA student at Cornell Johnson. I'm a dual degree MBA, MPA, so in public administration as well. Prior to, if you don't mind going to the next slide, Evan. Prior to Cornell, I was in the Peace Corps for about 4 years. I worked at a health startup before that, and I was the founder of a waste management company. No, I never thought I'd work with trash, but here we are. Currently, I'm at Apple with the Apple Care strategy team, and I major in international business and French. I go by she, her, hers for my pronouns, and I'm going to ask all of our panelists as well, so I'll go ahead and start us off with a fun fact that is, I don't like mustard unless it's in hot dogs. And so I'll pass it on to our next slide, and we'll go ahead and get started with Ryan. If you don't mind introducing yourself, a little bit about yourself, fun fact, and where you're at currently.
Yep. Hey, everyone. It's, I guess, nice to meet you virtually. So my name is Ryan. I am an MBA student at MIT Sloan up in Cambridge, where I currently am. Prior to my MBA, I worked for the federal government doing policy work. My undergrad was in biology, then I did a master's degree in something totally random. If you asked me 3 years ago if I would be in business school, I would have absolutely said no. I have spent my summer at Bain & Company working in management consulting, and I just signed a return there, so pretty excited. My fun fact is, I think I've never actually been to an NFL football game. So not opposed to it, just have never really had the opportunity.
Awesome, thanks. And then Sultan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Sultan Bryce. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am currently a second year at Harvard Business School, and I'm also coming to you from Cambridge. And so I kind of had an interesting summer. I actually joined a startup my RC year at HBS and joined in a full-time capacity as head of growth. So I've been doing that all summer. I'll be doing that through the next year and after. I'm also co-president of the Pride Club at HBS, and I'm really excited to hear that there's so many of you interested in business school. Did my undergrad at UNC Chapel Hill with Joey. One of my fun facts is that I actually lived and worked on a farm while I was in college.
That's awesome. Joey, you want to go next? Perfect handover right there.
Yeah, sure thing. Hey everyone, super excited to be here with you today. My name's Joey. I'm a second year at the UC Berkeley Haas School of Business. I spent my career prior to business school working in the nonprofit workforce development space at an organization called Year Up. I spent this summer interning at Salesforce in their marketing strategy and analytics department. And I'm hoping to go back in a year, time will tell. For my undergrad, with Sultan, I went to UNC Chapel Hill in North Carolina, where I got a degree in public health, specifically health policy management. And a fun fact about me is that in 2011, I rode my bicycle across the United States through a nonprofit called Bike and Build.
That's awesome. And then our next slide, we'll go ahead and get Kevin. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Yes. Hey everyone, my name is Kevin Sokol, pronouns he, him, his. I'm a current admissions director, so very familiar with everyone. I'm actually not an MBA, but I'm in my deferral period for the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. I applied when I was a senior in college a few years ago, and I'm currently in my deferral period. I am in a real estate investing position at Goldman Sachs as an associate.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Steph, do you mind introducing yourself as well?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Stefan. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I went to UC Irvine and studied business for undergrad, and then I worked at Deloitte Consulting in the tech practice for about 5 years before going to Kellogg, and I just graduated this past June through Zoom. And I'm doing a couple of internships right now in the food and sustainability space, and I'm going back to Deloitte, but will transition to more of like the sustainability space within the practice. And then my fun fact was actually what my internship was last summer, which is I worked at an environmentally sustainable water park in Bali.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. All right, and with all those introductions in, I do want to thank everyone for being here. As people, I think we're full right now at capacity, and so I'm excited to kind of share that with all of our attendees. And so we'll go ahead and get started with why an MBA. And so Joey, kind of interested to hear from you. You kind of made the transition from an NGO to an MBA, to the MBA space, which isn't, so as some people would say, as common. So curious to hear from you, kind of why you made that decision and where you're at right now.
Yeah, sure thing. So I think there are a couple of reasons. So one of which, so I worked in the nonprofit sector, specifically at Europe for 6 years, and it was at the intersection of social justice and the business world. So we would train young adult interns for entry-level corporate and tech roles at companies like Salesforce, LinkedIn, Google, et cetera. And I just came to understand, like, yes, nonprofits play an important role in making change, and the business world does as well. And so I wanted to get a taste for myself what it was like. And I also recognize like the business school is like the ideal way to make like a hard pivot in terms of your career. So I knew that I wanted to do something that was more quant and data analytics heavy than my roles previously. So I wanted to grow my network. I wanted to do a summer internship in something completely different. And I wanted this kind of whole package, like professional development experience to help me launch my career in a completely different direction. And it's really helped. It's definitely met all those goals of mine. So it's been great so far.
That's awesome. And similarly, Ryan, you kind of also made a slightly different switch coming from government to your MBA. And so curious to hear why that was. Was it similar to Joey, or were there any different factors that made your choice?
Yeah, I think there were kind of a couple different, like both professional and personal reasons why I decided to enter business school. I think, so I joined the federal government kind of in the previous administration, and like that aligned much more closely with my own, political beliefs, not to get into it too much, but it was sort of the perfect storm of, I was there for about 4 years and really enjoyed the work I was doing, but found that the nature of my job was such that I was really starting to plateau in terms of like new skills and challenges. And so, kind of looking up a level or two above me, I wasn't that excited about like what my future could potentially be if I decided to stay. And then at the same time, my husband was actually doing his MBA at Wharton, and I got to see like frankly just how much fun it was, and the additional opportunities that he was afforded to really like break free of like your kind of prior life before your MBA. So really, like honestly, with not much more of a motivation other than knowing what I was currently doing was not where I saw myself long term, and also like, hey, this looks like a lot of fun. Those were like my two big motivations. I think like in general, people probably should have slightly stronger articulations for why an MBA, but like so far it's worked out, and I've enjoyed it. And in the near term, I'm super excited about consulting because my background is so focused on public sector and like federal government that I think this will be a really fun experience to kind of expand my tool set. So maybe eventually I'll return to DC, but at least for a few years, I'm looking forward to, I guess, exhaling.
That's awesome, and that is a pretty big change to some extent. But Sultan, you were someone who actually was in healthcare, decided to stay in healthcare, and so curious how that played a role in why you chose an MBA.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I forgot to sort of say where I came from, but prior to business school, I worked in healthcare tech and consulting at Athena Health and Advisory Board. And I think for me, the sort of value articulation, as Ryan was talking about, is for anyone who's in healthcare, you kind of, it seems like this kind of breed of person who just, you either do it and then you get way out of it, or you're like, no, I'm like, I have to just keep figuring it out. There's endless amounts to learn. And so I sort of reached a point in my career where, as I was sort of scaling and taking on more responsibility, it was really clear two things. One, I was getting into meetings where people were using terms and ideas that like I didn't know, and I realized it's going to be really important for me to gain a skill set to continue to grow as a leader and as someone who could be effective in business. And so that was kind of the MBA skill set, which was really, the value was clear. And sort of this other edge, which was, there's so much to know about healthcare. I started to understand that I'd grown up in this really specific way of seeing things, and it was a really unique way of seeing things, but you know, there's many ways to see it. And so I've sort of started to get this itch about, well, why are we doing it this way? Why is tech being deployed this way? And you know, I wanted to learn a lot more. And so I think the path for me was getting exposure to different sectors within healthcare, different ways that other industries looked at problems that I was interested in solving. And I think, you know, there's no better place to do that than to be among a ton of other bright people using really similar and effective tools. And yeah, I think it's really panned out. And my experience in the first year has just like grown so much. I've developed my own view on the market in a way that I definitely couldn't have done without the MBA. And so, yeah.
That's awesome. And then I'm curious, Kevin and Steph, you have slightly different perspectives, right? One who's deferred, and Steph, you who was, I believe was sponsored, right? And so you can't, Kevin, just curious to hear why deferral number one, why MBA, why then? Do you have any plans in the future to start your MBA? And what are some of the factors that played into deciding why to apply?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and I think for all of the current attendees, there really has been a proliferation of these deferral programs. There's a number of top schools that provide them, including Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, MIT, University of Chicago, et cetera, Northwestern, like so many. And for me, it really felt like in my fourth year, when I knew I was going to have a little more time, I wasn't going to be working in a banking job, I could take the GMAT. I could take I chose the GMAT. You could take the GRE, lasts for 5 years, and then you'd at least have that for that period of time if you do want to apply. So I highly suggest everyone, if you do have time, take the test, even if you don't want to apply immediately. But applying immediately for me it's a free option. Like if you do get in somewhere, you then have a 2 to 5 year deferral where it's sort of on you to decide if you want to attend in the future. I was entering a real estate private equity position. I wasn't sure if I was going to love investing. I wasn't sure if I was going to love real estate. And I really knew that I wanted a pivot point, at least an option to pivot if I wanted one. And so it was a perfect time. And especially during a pandemic when there's unemployment, it felt like if anything does go wrong, I have an option. So that was my rationale.
That's awesome. And Steph, you from a sponsorship perspective, was there anything that prompted you to apply that you felt you needed or that you could gain through your MBA?
Yeah, I think so. As I mentioned, I studied business in undergrad as well. So some people are like, why are you doing business again? And I think from my perspective, all of the business related classes that I took in undergrad were very conceptual before you actually could go into the workforce. And there's a lot of, you know, like people dynamics, social dynamics, politics, and like all that kind of stuff that is very important for your success in the workplace as well. So I think that I found it really valuable to go and take, like, kind of build or enhance those core business skills in that kind of environment and then come back to the workforce. And I think for me, from a more personal perspective, one of the reasons that I wanted to go to business school, obviously there's the career progression and career acceleration, all of those other great reasons. But for me, I didn't have the best experience in undergrad. And I think that a large part of that was because I wasn't out and wasn't being myself. So for me, a big part of what propelled me to even want to apply to business school in the first place was to be fully out and be myself and enter an org being myself. And honestly, I think that going to business school was one of the best life decisions I've ever made, only second to coming out.
That's awesome. And I'll stay with you for the next question, which is talking a little bit more about the overall MBA experience. And so being kind of like a minority within a minority, being a female queer individual, was there anything that played a role in when you were doing your MBA, or were there any differences that you still supported throughout your MBA journey? Just a little bit more about your overall experience.
Yeah, so as I'm sure you're all aware, within the business world, women are a minority. That's not so much the case in business school, because I think the admissions committee does a pretty good job at trying to make it 50-50. However, you know, in the workforce, women are still a minority in management positions and leadership positions. But for me, being a triple minority, you know, person of color, woman, and a lesbian, what I realized in my business school process is that my voice really matters a lot, and my upbringing and background and my perspective, I think that it gave me a unique perspective in realizing that my career success wasn't in spite of my identities, but because of them. And I think that especially in business school, there was a really, really safe space to just be yourself and to be in a very like safe and welcoming environment where people recognize your strengths. And I think also being my age, like, you know, mid to late 20s, I think at that age, I became more like comfortable in my own skin and embraced my identities. So I think that also played a part in me recognizing what I had to offer and bringing that to the table.
That's awesome. And in our conversation, Sultan, you kind of also talked about bringing our whole self to the table. And so I'm curious if that played any role in you trying, for example, I don't know how elections work, sorry, at HBS, but like in you trying to be the president for the Pride Club, being the first trans president of the Pride Club at Harvard Business School is probably a pretty big achievement. And so I'm curious to see if there's anything in there as well that kind of affected your overall experience thus far for your first year.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if there are any trans people out there, you can do it. You know, I think when I was applying to business school, you know, that was the first question in my mind is like, do trans people even go to business school? Can they get in? And I think in my experience, I applied to like 10 schools. I think at most schools, I would have been the first. I think at HBS, I'm the third trans person that we know of. I'm definitely the first trans president, which is kind of cool because it's actually our 40th anniversary year for Pride at HBS. It's one of the first Pride organizations. And I think, you know, I'm so happy about O4U, and I think about Ramba, sort of the other counterpart, where these LGBT MBA networks and just business communities are like really, really important, and they're like lifeblood. I mean, I mentioned Joey and I know each other, Ryan and I have known each other for a while through those networks. And, you know, I just recommend everyone continue to stay involved in O4U and Ramba and to give back in clubs. And so I guess, you know, to your question, I think, and building on what Steph was saying is, you know, these identities that we hold, these perspectives that we have are critical for creating the organizations that are basically going to be poised to succeed in the future. I think it's, you know, we all get to live in this historical moment where LGBT rights look rapid, like, I mean, just incredibly different than even when we were younger. And so the question of what to do with that, I think, is an important one for business leaders to think about, and for us who are in the position of holding sort of both these identities and being in organizations, you know, it's one to take seriously. And so I think to Steph's point, I really agree. It sort of really dawned on me as I got to HBS, and it was hard for sure to be like, how do I bring this up? How do I be just myself and also a business student? And I think it's real work to integrate and be your whole self. And I think it's work that's really important, and work that our sort of next generation of leaders have to do. And so all this to say is, you know, I'm proud to be out. I'm visibly out. It's a big part of my work that I'm doing in the startup. And, you know, I think it takes a lot of courage to do that, but I think it's incredibly important. And yeah, I think that kind of addresses your question. I don't know if there's exactly a more specific way to say it, but, you know, I guess my advice and my thought on it is, it's going to be hard to decide. I'm sure everyone who experiences this, how to be out, when to be out. In my experience, even as a trans person, where I'm often the only or the first, it's still worth it, because I think that, you know, we're creating the world we want to live in. As part of getting an MBA is to build a skill set of the future, hopefully.
That's awesome. And it's great to hear that, at least whether you're being supported or you're paving the way for others, I'd personally like to thank you for being able to do that for others who will most likely come after you. And so we've talked a little bit about personal growth and our support system in that way, but I'm also curious about from a professional side, how supported you've been feeling, especially Ryan and Joey, who probably did, I don't know if you came from a quant heavy background or majored in anything quant related, which I feel like the answer is no, but did you feel supported while you were an MBA to make sure you learned those analytical skills that were required for the positions we were going into?
Yeah, Joey,
sorry.
I was gonna say, Joey, feel free to go first if you'd like. Yeah.
I mean, I think from my perspective, something that's really awesome about the MBA is it's like a choose your own adventure. There's like the areas you can focus in are like, I think someone outlined them to me as like social, academic, career, and like maybe entrepreneurship. I think that's pretty reductive, but and it's really up to you. Well, I'm curious like whether this is reflected in other people's experience as well, but it's really up to you to pursue what you want to get out of it. So I'm pursuing a certificate in business analytics while I'm here, which is like checking some of the boxes I have in terms of growing quantitatively and with experience in data analytics. But it's an MBA program, so it's a generalist program. I'm not getting an MS in data science or whatever the case might be. So, for example, a goal I have this semester is to do like a side internship with unpaid probably with a company and that could use some help with data analytics. And my careers office is going to help, is like there to help me to make those connections and make that transition. And I think one of the coolest things about business school is the network piece. And it's like, I think on one hand, like business school gets this rap of like, oh, it's just like you're paying a ton of money for like a network and all that stuff, but it's truly something special. Like we have a Slack channel at Haas comprised of the folks above us, my class, folks below us, and someone can post in it and say, hey, does anyone have experience in blank, blank, blank? And it's sometimes in the most like obtuse kind of subject, and someone will pop in and say, I do, happy to talk, happy to walk you through that. And that's, I think, some of the power of the MBA that has been really helpful for me. I sometimes, and the last thing I'll say is like, I sometimes describe this experience as like, if it often feels like my classmates and me we're each just like in this journey, pursuing our dreams and trying to achieve our goals. And we're all just like rooting each other on and supporting each other in various ways. And it's been great just to have that kind of support system throughout it. So.
That's awesome. It's funny you mentioned that. I just posted in our Slack, it must have been 3 days ago, where it was something super niche. I was like, there's no way anyone's gonna know this. And suddenly like 7 people in my class knew about it. And I was like, how? Like, how do you guys have such knowledge on like this really tiny little niche topic? And so it's interesting to see that really you can leverage your network so crazily, and people are actually excited to help, which I think is the best part. And so Joey, Ryan, I know I cut you off, but just curious to see from that perspective, from government to business, how did that transition go, at least for your first year?
Yeah, for sure. So I think a lot of what the other panelists have said like really resonates with me also. I think the idea, even in understanding my first year of business school kind of relative to my undergrad experience, like, I was, as I said, like a biology major. I did a lot of like ecology work. So like, no, I did not have a legitimate quant background, I think. I just really liked being outside and like getting muddy. And I think the other piece was like in undergrad, I also was not out. So it was just a very different feel. And even at the time, I felt like I was kind of my true self. But I think as I've aged and have come out and like, I'm in a city as opposed to like a rural area where I was for undergrad. So much has changed, and I think it really has impacted my like educational experience in my MBA. I think the other kind of key piece is in undergrad, like I absolutely prioritized kind of chasing a GPA, and I think that was sort of at the detriment of learning. Not to say that it was not important to do well academically, but I think it really informed almost everything down to like which classes or like professors or sections I was choosing. And one thing that I know is true at MIT, and like maybe I shouldn't say this to folks, but like grades don't matter. If you're in an MBA program, like you'll be fine. Recruiters will never ask you for your GPA. You'll never talk about it with classmates. Like it's just antithetical to like the experience. And so it's taken me a solid year to truly internalize that and understand that I shouldn't be intimidated by the classes that I think I should take or the classes that like interest me, as opposed to like taking like the easy classes or something. I think especially for me being like, I would say probably on the upper end of the like average age, like range of, you know, MBA students, it's kind of a now or never feeling also. So especially with focusing on more kind of quant stuff, I think I would have had a very fixed mindset even a few years ago. And I think Sloan, and I'm sure a lot of you know, great business programs really do emphasize the growth mentality throughout the process.
That's awesome. And so now I want to take us kind of like a step back into, all right, what was in your mind before you were applying to business school, and how did you go about your application process, right? Were there any specific aspects about yourself, your work that you wanted to highlight, and how did you go about that? And so, Ryan, I'll stay with you if you don't mind. We'll kind of go around if there was anything, I'll combine two questions into one. Was there anything related to financing that actually helped you make that decision or not? Did money play a role in any way? I know it's a taboo topic at times, but it's an important topic that we discuss. And so curious to know both application process and financing combined.
Yeah, no, great question. So I think like when I was looking for business schools, like I got to know my husband's program pretty well and like thought it provided an awesome opportunity and like was absolutely the right school for him. I think for me, I knew I wanted to basically repeat the like how I described it as like the liberal arts vibe that I really enjoyed in undergrad, which to me is like smaller community. You know, there's a lot of like baked in kind of humility and like, I don't know, energy to it, which I think even large programs can have. But so I was very much focused on like that vibe, I guess. And then also there was like very much a geographic consideration as well. I knew I wanted to stay on the East Coast because most of our family is here. I wanted to be in a big city. So it just kind of was like the perfect mix, I guess, of different criteria that were on my list. I think like in going through the process, regardless of where you apply or decide to enroll, this sounds like a cliche and people said it to me and I don't think I understood it, but like really make sure that you know yourself well enough to be able to demonstrate to a school like not only why you want to go there, but also like what you will bring, like what is unique to you that you will bring to the classroom and to like the social aspect of your classmates. I think as some other folks have mentioned, like network is a part of business school, and learning from your peers and figuring out how to collaborate and work on tough problems is absolutely as valuable, if not more, than like what you learn in the classroom from a tenured professor. So really spend some time reflecting on like why you want to go, which I mentioned like I probably should have done a better job of, but also like know yourself well, be able to communicate your vision and your goals there. On the financing side, yes, it is important to consider. I was like privileged enough that I graduated from undergrad without any debt. So like this was a new world for me to navigate. I guess one piece of advice is if you are fortunate to get multiple offers for admission and any do give you funding, don't be shy about having those funding offer discussions with other schools that did not give you funding. So another school that I also liked very much, like gave me funding for my education, and initially MIT did not. And you know, I think typically people hate talking about money. And so I like almost wasn't going to say anything to Sloan admissions about it. And I'm very thankful I did, because they didn't like match dollar for dollar, but like they certainly contributed to my education. So long-winded way of saying, don't be shy about talking about money. And the worst thing they can say is no. They're not gonna, you know, withdraw your admission or something. So don't be shy about it.
Awesome. Sultan, do you want to talk a little bit more about any aspects that you kind of highlighted in your application, and if financing played a role in your decision to where you decided to ultimately enroll?
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, I'm president of both the Healthcare Club and the Pride Club, which just means that I take a lot of calls of prospective students, which is awesome. I've gotten to talk with a lot of people, and here's my distilled wisdom after hundreds of, maybe 100 calls. It's, you need to answer 4 questions, like why you, why now, why an MBA, and why whatever school. And it, you know, should be different for every different schools. So if you can do that in a compelling way that is self-aware and addresses your strengths and weaknesses, I think you're going to be in good shape. And just sort of on the finances piece, you know, I remember one of the first schools I visited, one of the MBAs there, his advice for me was, you know, you can never get a different MBA. It's probably the most important decision of your life. You can even get divorced, but you can't get a different MBA than the one you get, which is like really extreme, but it did stay with me in my head a little bit. And so all that is to say is that, you know, that answer to those 4 questions in the school should be like a really good match. And you should think about that, and no amount of money, so to speak, like in the nitty gritty, if it's 5,000 here versus 1,000 there, if that's the difference, like sort of think a little bit wider about the decision, because I think fit is going to be really key, and how comfortable you feel at that school is going to be key. And so for me, I applied to consortium for a lot of schools, which I was like really, really excited about. And for me, it came down to choosing between the consortium at a school, which would have been a full ride, and a HBS, which is not a consortium member. And it was a really hard choice. But for me, I'm also married. My wife works at Harvard. We have our whole life in Cambridge. We've been living here before. You know, there are all these other sort of secular non-business school things that mattered in my decision. And so the calculus sort of changed. And whether it was going up to a school that was like in a place that was really different for us or whatever, or staying and sort of living our life as we had been living it, and letting her career flourish because she was also building a thing here. That was like ultimately the right choice. And so I think to Ryan's point, it's just a conversation about where you are in your life with your partner, or whatever your sort of situation is in a family context. And then finding the good fit, and then sort of figuring out how you add value and receive value in a community. And for me, just kind of being specific about Harvard Business School, like it did mean a lot to me that there were other trans people there, and I had talked with them. And I was kind of pretty nervous about being the first at a specific school. I think it would have been a good experience, but you know, it meant a lot to me in this sort of psychological way that people had already paved that path, and that it was in this place that I'd already been in. And to be honest, like the healthcare program at HBS is really awesome. And I've gotten to really see that come to full fruition in my time here. And so, you know, I guess to wrap that up is to say it's a huge investment. It's super hard to be like, what? Like, I'm going to put this much money into it, but like, you know, I guess I'm a full believer that the return is there. And I think this will wrap up. The first thing that the dean said to us on the first day of school at HBS is like, it doesn't really make sense mathematically why you're here. Like the opportunity cost, it just like doesn't add up. You're probably not going to see immediate value of the degree. You'll see sort of peak value like 20 years from now. And so I think just having that long view that like, sure, maybe the investment doesn't seem to make sense in the sort of 1 to 3 year time horizon. But if you project it out a little further, you know, in general, I think an MBA is like a great investment. And so who knows? I think y'all are the next class to figure out if that really does hold true as a full-time program with COVID and all that. But even in the short term, I've seen value.
Yeah, that's awesome. And there certainly is, I think, some value that's a little harder to tangibly put into that ROI. And so I think that's where a lot of the magic comes from. Steph, just curious of same for your application process. Was there anything that you highlighted and from a sponsorship perspective that kind of led you to one school or another?
Yeah, I could speak to kind of like the sponsorship details and process. So if some of you aren't aware, so there are a lot of consulting companies and I think some banking companies too that will actually sponsor MBAs for some of their employees. There's a whole process that you have to go through to apply, and you have to have certain marks for like your year-end evaluations and be considered a high performer to be considered for it. But if you do get sponsorship, then it works a little bit different for different firms. So for Deloitte, which is the company that I was working at and I'm returning to next month, the way that it works is you actually exit the firm and you're no longer a Deloitte employee. and you get the tuition bills normally, and you pay the tuition bills like with your own money or taking loans out. And then after you finish business school, then you return to the firm. And after you finish your first year back at the firm, then they'll reimburse you half the tuition. And then you finish your second year, and then they reimburse you the second half, and then you're free to leave. But I know other companies do it in different ways. Like I think Bain, you don't even see the tuition bill. They just send it straight to the company and they pay it. And so each company has different rules. So you'll definitely want to like look in and make sure that you know that latest information. Different companies also have different rules about your internships for the summer. So for Deloitte, you could work anywhere as long as it's not a competitor, so not another consulting company. I think for other companies, I think Bain, you could work at a nonprofit or something like that for the summer. So you'll just have to, look into whatever each company's rules are around that. But about accepting sponsorship. So I think a lot of sponsored students walk into business school thinking that, I probably won't return, like we'll see what else is out there. But realistically, it's such a good deal, like just returning for 2 years or whatever the contract is to get your MBA paid for. It's going to be pretty tough to find, frankly, it's going to be pretty tough to find a tempting enough offer to not return. Obviously, some people don't. I would say around 80% of people do return. The ones who don't either, start their own business or have a career switch and have a tempting enough offer for it to make sense for them not to return. I think for me, because I knew that I kind of had that full-time offer in the back of my pocket, I had the liberty to do something random for my internship, like work at a water park doing business development in Bali. And because of that, I became really interested in the sustainability side of business. And so that actually led me to then want to work in food and sustainability within Deloitte when I return. So it really depends on like what you're looking for, what your finances look like, and the other opportunities. But you'll definitely want to just do your research before.
All right, awesome. And then Kevin, I guess I'm curious after this conversation and we've kind of discussed a little bit more about the MBA, is there anything in particular that you're most looking forward to, or that you kind of wish that you are going to try to work on, for example, before you get to your MBA? Is there anything that you're looking any skills that you're looking to develop prior to that?
That's a good question. I'm still in the very much like, I have no idea if I want to go back to MBA stage. For me, in my current position in real estate investing, sorry, that's my end. In real estate investing, you don't necessarily need an MBA. It is something that it's a little more about experience, developing relationships as you work towards sort of the more senior associate VP level sourcing deals, and many for an MBA that can be sort of just delaying that process. So I'm currently in the mindset of like, wow, I have this amazing opportunity that I've been so excited about for a lot of years, and I love the community, and I've worked super closely with the Booth Scholars community, but I also don't know if it's something that would be a perfect fit for my career trajectory, just because I have liked private equity and may just stay in it long term. So I would say you don't have to know everything if you do decide to apply to business school as a deferral. But on this on the financing piece, I just did want to add one thing, that some of the deferral programs do have scholarship components built into them. So if you are admitted, there are small scholarships that you get, and then you are still eligible in the year that you decide to enroll to provide updated information and be looked at for different merit or financial aid scholarships. And then also I would say, I know that some firms, even if they don't have specific sponsorship programs, you can negotiate directly with your manager, and sometimes they're able to find a compensation package that effectively makes it such that on return you get X dollar bonus over what you would get on returning in your first year, and then over X dollar in your second year. So even if you're at a firm where you don't know anyone who's done it, that doesn't mean you shouldn't ask, and shouldn't ask around and sort of see what you can do.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. And I know we're coming to a close of our talk. And so I would love to have everyone, if you can, describe in 5 words or less. It's not a test, but kind of. If you can describe in 5 words or less your MBA experience thus far, how would you describe it? And so if anyone's ready, feel free to raise your hand. So I won't call you yet. Which if you do apply to MBA school, you will learn a lot about. Joe, were you ready? Was that a raising hand? All right, let's go.
Super awesome growth opportunity. Wow.
I love the exclamation at the end. Anyone else want to go? Go ahead, Sultan.
All right. What I hoped, not expected.
All right.
Oh, gosh. Okay. I haven't thought this through, so we'll see how it goes. Okay. Challenging, busy, fun, exciting, and I don't know. I think I already said fun, but we'll add it a second time because it is fun. Sure.
Steph, go ahead. You're muted.
I'm muted. I'll do it again. A 2-year-long party.
There's definitely a fun theme towards the end. And so it's always exciting to know. Hopefully, for all of y'all who are in the call, know that it is definitely a super fun experience. Doing your MBA is both extremely challenging, but also very rewarding. I think for everyone here in the call, you'll know that just hopefully you have learned that there are tons of support systems for y'all at your MBA schools. It's what you make of it, but that you will really, really enjoy just being in the MBA if that process is for you. So make sure you dig deep, you learn a little bit more about yourself, answer those 4 questions that Sultan talked about. And if you find that the answer is yes, then hopefully we'll see you at one of these schools. And so our contact info is currently on the screen. And so feel free to contact us if you have any questions. We'd love to answer any of those questions that you have, from anything from the application process all the way to what life is like for an LGBTQ student at these schools. And so thank you so much. And I'll pass it back to Evan.
All right, thanks everyone. And really huge thank you to our panelists. I know that there were a few questions on Pathable that we didn't get to. I'll follow up with you all on Slack. And so definitely huge thank you to our panelists for sharing their perspectives. Really appreciate it. We have a really awesome set of panelists here with a really great diverse set of perspectives. Also, if you want to follow up with questions on Slack with some of the conference directors as well, key ones to reach out to would be myself. I'm about to start at Kellogg. Alan Shee is about to start at Wharton. Rachel is a deferred admission in the 2+2 program at HBS. And then Kevin, who is in the deferred admission for Booth. So any of us, and definitely also our panelists. All right, so that's it. Thanks so much, everyone. Really appreciate it.